This is a overshadowing of the protection and goodness of our God to fulfill his plan for his people. This is the coming of the Messiah. And though it didn't all add up, it didn't make sense, Mary believed it in faith.
This message is from Rock of Ages Lutheran Church in Payson, Arizona. Ancient Faith for Today's World. December 24th, 2023. Luke 1, verses 26 to 38.
In my house, we have something of a tradition where we take out what we call the puzzle table. And we start our new year usually by picking out a puzzle and putting that puzzle together. Now, if you've ever done a puzzle, you can understand how sometimes it's hard to start out on that puzzle if you're not sure that all the pieces are going to be there. That is, if you have a 500, 1,000, 5,000 piece puzzle, whatever it might be, you don't want to put your puzzle together and find out it doesn't all fit because you're missing a piece. That's maybe why we try to avoid purchasing used puzzles. The only other option is to sit there and count every piece to make sure. Do we sometimes act that way when it comes to God's plans for us and how we fit in as we serve our God? I'm wondering if that's maybe how a young woman felt a long time ago as she received the message of God's plan for her, and it didn't all add up exactly as she thought it might, and so she wondered about it. She was puzzled. But today we look at the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and there we see how that woman Mary heard the message of God's plan and how she served in faith, and how important it is that when we serve our God, we do so not wondering how things fit together, but in faith. Luke starts his account as he mentions that Gabriel came to a priest in the temple, and that man Zechariah, as he was serving in the temple, got that message that even though he was old, his wife Elizabeth, well beyond childbearing years, would have a son, and he would be the forerunner to the Messiah. Luke mentions how Zechariah didn't believe the message of the angel. He was wondering, how is this possible? There's Zechariah, the priest, the mature priest who's serving in the temple of God. And in the temple, as he's serving, he still is not doing it in full faith that God can do what he and will do what he promised. And so Zechariah was struck speechless because of his lack of faith. Then how would things go as Gabriel, the angel, came to that young woman living in that small town far away from Jerusalem in Nazareth, a virgin named Mary, perhaps somewhere around the age of 16 or maybe even younger. This young woman received that message as the angel appeared to her, and Gabriel says to her, "Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you." Zechariah, it says, was overwhelmed with fear. Mary, not so much, but it does say Mary was perplexed, puzzled, and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. And so Gabriel explained the wonderful news he had come to bring. He said, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will give birth to a son, and he will be great. You are to give him the name Jesus. He will sit and take upon the throne and reign over the throne of his father David, and his is a kingdom that will never end." Now that right there was a lot to take in. Maybe a lot of people today, if you told them this message, would be wondering, what is this all about? The throne of David? A son who would reign forever? But Mary was not puzzled about this. She had faith. She knew the promise that was long given through scriptures, that there would be a king who would sit on the throne. Right now, as Luke records in the start of the chapter, there was not an Israelite king even. It says Herod was ruling over Judea. The king over the area in Jerusalem was an Edomite, was not of the line of David. So Mary was wondering. Mary was perplexed. First of all, she was probably perplexed because Mary hears the angel say, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." She was a sinner. And did the angel somehow miss his way going past the temple? And did he forget to take that turn at Jerusalem to talk to the right person? Because Mary was just a young woman in a small town named Nazareth in the middle of practically nowhere, not near Jerusalem. And yes, Luke does record that Mary was pledged to be married to a man named Joseph from the line of David. But that didn't appear so significant. David and his line had long been shattered, and Joseph, of the line of David, was part of a broken line where it seemed like there was going to be ever no king again who would reign on David's throne from David's line. And so Mary was wondering about this. But it took faith. Faith in the promise of God that he would do what he had promised. That God would send the king that was promised to bring peace over all this world. But Mary still didn't get all the pieces. And so she asked, "How can this be, since I'm a virgin?" Mary had not yet begun her marriage with Joseph. She had known no man. So the angel gives another explanation as he says, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And so the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God." Now, Mary already in faith believed that God would send the Messiah to reign on David's throne just as promised. But now she hears, not only is she going to give birth to the Messiah, but it will be the Holy Son of God taking on human flesh. The incarnation, that God would wrap himself in lowliness and come in human flesh to live in this world as our King. That also took faith on Mary's part. And that she, a virgin, would give birth to the Son of God. You know, a lot of women would probably hear this and would today respond very differently. Maybe even some of those who claim to serve God would not respond so much in faith, but would say, "No, my body, my choice." Now, I don't mean to just pick on those who commit the sin of abortion and kill their children. But that attitude of my body, my choice is seen throughout, both men and women, throughout the life of people who live in this world. And Christians struggle with it too. Do we serve God? Are we able to serve God? But rather assert our own rights and our own self and put our interest above God's. And when God comes and invites us to serve him in his kingdom, rather than responding in faith, the human heart responds with rejection. You know, it's a miracle that God would fulfill that promise and send the Messiah, the promised one of David's line, to reign on the throne. It's a miracle that the Son of God would take on human flesh. But maybe the biggest miracle that Luke records here is that Mary believed it all. Mary believed that the Messiah would come and that the one to be born from her would be the Holy One of God, conceived by the Holy Spirit. It was puzzling, a mystery. When Gabriel, the angel, describes it, he says, "The power of the Most High will overshadow you." Sort of echoing some of the words from Psalm 91. You will find shelter under his wings. His wings will cover you. It's not a fearsome, wicked, or evil overshadowing. This is a overshadowing the protection and goodness of our God to fulfill his plan for his people. This is the coming of the Messiah. And though it didn't all add up, it didn't make sense, Mary believed it in faith. You know, it's a miracle that you believe these words, that God sent the Messiah, born of David's line, of the line of Joseph and of Mary, and who would take that position on his throne and reign forever. It's a miracle that you would believe that the Son of God would come to this world in human flesh, incarnate. But it's a miracle that you believe it. This is the work of God. And to serve him, to accept everything he says is done because we believe what he has done in faith. You know, it seems impossible. How can this be that the Son of God would come to this world? How could it be that he would be willing to take on that form of a human body and live as a true man? Shouldn't the Son of God have been saying my body, my choice, and rejected this plan to come to this world and give his life? It was his body. And yes, for him it was his choice, and he chose to do the Father's will. In perfect obedience to the Father, holding to the plan of salvation, in full faithfulness, the Son of God chose to give his life, his body, for the sins of the world. That's why he was born. And he who came to give his life and shed his blood on the cross chose to do that so that we, sinful as we are, might have a king who fought our battle for us, winning for us forgiveness. And even though we as sinners do not serve him as we ought, he came to serve and give his life as a ransom. And Jesus, the Holy One that was born, is great because he rose again from death and forever reigns on his throne. He is seated at the right hand of the Father, sitting forever on his throne, the one from David's line. God keeps his plans. Even if we don't fully always understand how they're going to carry out or what our role is, even if we're sometimes puzzled on what it means to serve him, we can serve him. You know, we were Christmas caroling with our church group the other day, and this particular group was the children's Christmas carolers. And we ended up going to a senior care place where not everybody could come out of their room. So we went down the hallways, and we went from room to room. Sometimes the children would enter the room and sing to those who were there, and sometimes they stayed in the hallway and people could hear them across the hall in the various rooms nearby. At one point we came to a stop in the hallway where we had a couple rooms and people were listening. As we went along, they would greet us and say, "Merry Christmas, thank you for singing to us." At one point we stopped and there was an aviary with some birds, and one of the littlest in our group stopped and was fascinated as she stared at those birds, and yet she continued to sing. And I'm sure that those birds fascinated her as much as she was delighting those who heard her sing those carols. We continued and moved on, and I just thought, this is a good experience for everyone. Later on that day, I told that little one, "You did a good job going from room to room, singing to those people. Do you know why we had to go to their rooms?" "Why?" she asked. And I explained, "Because many of them are sick or injured and they're not able to even leave their room. So it's great that you were able to come to them and sing those Christmas carols to them and tell them about Jesus. You did a good job." Only she seemed perplexed, not just on why we were going room to room. She seemed puzzled and had one more question that had been evidently bothering her all afternoon. So she asked, "So then why did we stop and sing to those birds?" You know, she might not have understood exactly what was going on in every moment, but she just accepted it and served in faith. That's kind of what it was like for Mary. She didn't know exactly how this plan would exactly be carried out, and how all God's puzzle pieces fit together for a lowly woman like her in a small town like Nazareth from a broken line of kings. But she said, as the angel gave her this news, "May it be to me as you have said. I am the Lord's servant." We don't need to understand every aspect of how God fulfills his plans. We only need to believe it and trust that he is carrying out his good plan to bring us forgiveness and life, to do the impossible, that the Son of God would take on human flesh, that he would give his life, that he would rise again, and he would reign forever, and that we have found favor with God. We who are sinners have God with us, that he sends his Spirit, and the Holy Spirit comes to us and gives us a new heart of faith, the beginning of new life within, that Christ would choose to dwell with us and give us of himself in his sacrament. All these things are mysteries. But as we serve God in our life, we can see him who gave his body and chose to love us. And we, in faith, trusting in his good plan, can serve him. Like that little child singing to the birds, not knowing exactly why or what was going on, but knowing it was good to serve. Or that young woman saying to the angel, "May it be to me as you have said," not knowing exactly how or why God's plan was focused on her, but that in grace he had chosen her. And God in grace has chosen you. You who are now highly favored. The Lord is with you. He has sent his Son. Now serve him in faith.